Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very good evening and warm welcome to you. And thank you for coming on for this, our 7th online Wellington Trust monthly lecture. It is an occasion I'm much looking forward to, because on this occasion, our guest speaker, who has given a recorded delivery, but for good reasons, and you'll see why, is Dr. Margaret Lincoln. I'll tell you more about her in a minute. Just a bit of housekeeping to kick off, as comme d'habitude, and that is that we will be taking questions and answers. I mentioned that Margaret is actually giving a recorded one this time, so but she is here with us, and at the usual slot at the end of the lecture, if you would like to leave your questions, Margaret will be here to give you answers, and I'm sure they're all going to be extremely interesting as well, knowing Margaret well. Just to get your questions in place, you'll see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A icon, question and answer icon. Please use that. Don't use the chat option, because this will not be available during the lecture. If you want to stay on at the end of the lecture, as some of us do, you'll be very welcome to do that. It's a wonderful session of informality for a few minutes, with a glass of wine or with a glass of wine in mind, one or the other, and stay on and chat. I believe that Margaret, bless her, is going to stay behind for a little while as well, until actually the dinner bell rings, that is, anyway. The transfer across from the end of the live session or the formal session across into the chat afterwards may take a few seconds for you, but don't despair, because I hope there are going to be quite a number of people. In fact, I can see 88 already on this lecture, which is tremendous. So if all 88 came on, it might take a minute or a minute and a quarter or a minute and a half just to get you on, but don't despair, because you will be brought in by Matt Edgar, who is our ever-present excellent IT specialist on this lecture. The recording of the lecture will be sent to you as a link after the lecture. That's what I've got to say about that. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my board colleague, Dr. Margaret Lincoln, who is a lady of great interest, a great interest. She is an author, an established, very, very excellent author. I have read her work, so it must be okay. And she is a former deputy director of the National Maritime Museum, no less. And she, as a trustee, is our exhibition lead, amongst her other roles. But she's been on the board for a number of years in her general role, also as a trustee. As I've said, she is well respected, and her books include Trading in War, which is a tremendous book, which was nominated for the 2019 Wolfson History Prize. I think she very, very nearly won it, from what I heard in the piece on the BBC where this was being announced live. And she has also written The British Pirates and Society, 1680-1730. I would also mention that Margaret is a research fellow at the University of Portsmouth. And it may well be that some of our colleagues from the University of Portsmouth will be on this evening. And indeed, we have, I believe, been collaborating with them over the forthcoming exhibition, of which Jenny Mosley will be telling you a little bit more after the lecture. So with no more ado, and hopefully that's short enough for you, Margaret, may I please hand over to you to hear you. Thank you.
Good evening. I hope you're intrigued by the title of this talk. People usually sensationalize the Golden Age of Piracy, but I'm going to be looking at the humdrum aspects of the pirate experience, their home life, and their relations with women. And my curiosity about this was piqued by a letter I found in the National Archives. It's a letter from a pirate entering the Indian Ocean to his wife at home in New York. He writes, "This is to acquaint you that I am now in the Eastings, and I do think that our voyage will last 2 years. But I am of an honest mind to you still. So, having no more at present but my love to you and to our child, your ever true and constant husband, till death us do part, Abraham Saul. Well, I wonder what his wife thought about that. Most seamen in the age of sail were young unmarried men, and the same is true of most pirates. Yet while we tend to think of pirates operating in a male environment, many had domestic ties. These were often reported matter-of-factly in various media, including contemporary newspapers, trial reports, and accounts of the last dying speeches of condemned men. In short, pirates are routinely recorded as having wives and children, whose well-being was inextricably tied up with their own risky fortunes. Captain Kidd, for example, married a wealthy woman called Sarah in New York, and they had at least 2 daughters. His apparent respectability helped to recommend him as a pirate catcher. But once at sea, it failed to deter him from changing sides and joining the very pirates he was meant to imprison, which proved unfortunate. The pirate Ned Lowe notoriously refused to take married men because he had a family himself and knew the pain separation caused, or so the story goes. Philip Roche, executed for piracy in 1723, was identified and caught in London when the authorities intercepted a letter he had written to his wife. But some husbands were reported to have taken to piracy in a desperate effort to escape their wives. Major Stede Bonnet, wealthy, educated, and respected, allegedly suffered a mental disturbance, quote, occasioned by some discomforts he found in a married state, which spurred him to a life of piracy and crime. Most pirates were former merchant or naval seamen, and their wives performed much the same functions as seamen's women did, keeping house in their husband's absence, bringing up children, and looking after their husband's interests as best they could. But what's interesting is that accounts of pirate marriages and their other liaisons with women throw light on contemporary views of gender roles. In England at this time, there seems to have been something of a gender crisis. Male and female roles were hotly debated, as in this book about married life. This may have been triggered by ongoing structural changes in society which impacted on the family. In rural areas, a growing concentration of land ownership drove smallholders off the land. The slow decline of traditional craft production and the rise of an uncompromising mercantilist economy based on London also caused tensions within the traditional patriarchal family. Towards the lower end of the social scale, the wives of the poor were becoming domestic drudges for their absent husbands, rather than partners in a family workshop. But arguably, seamen's wives had always been in this position. In publications reflecting the contemporary gender debate, often women claimed equal rights in marriage and asserted their own sexual desires. In turn, the male point of view is found in pamphlets criticizing female behavior. Publications censoring women were answered by others undermining men. For example, ballads described seamen's wives as girls of the game, who flirted and drank in their husband's absence. The wives refuted this in their own ballad, setting out a bleak picture of loneliness and debt. Here, one verse reads, "How could you say there was many wives that did drink, rant, and sing, which I protest there's not any of us that practice this thing. Are we not forced to borrow, being left here without chink? 'Tis in a cup of cold sorrow we so often do drink." Masculinity itself could be challenged. A pamphlet of 1703, ostensibly by a female author, claimed that men had become as effeminate as women. "They sit in monstrous long periwigs like so many owls in ivy bushes, and esteem themselves more upon the reputation of being a beau than on the substantial qualifications of honour, courage, learning, and judgment. Well, owls in an ivy bush was a common saying. It described a kind of vacant sapience. Ivy is associated with Bacchus and drink, and the point is that the men may look wise, but they are mostly drunk. Now, these contemporary anxieties about standards of masculinity provide a context within which to consider pirate lifestyles and the behaviour that pirates adopted or displayed towards women. Contemporary anxieties about masculinity are found in accounts of women pirates. Only 2 women are known to have fought alongside their men as members of a pirate crew. But they became so notorious, and such evocative prints of them appeared in collections of pirate histories, that their impact was disproportionate to their number. Mary Read and Anne Bonny fought at sea in men's clothes and were finally captured with the pirate Jack Rackham, Anne's dashing lover. Rackham was allowed to see Anne for the last time on the morning of his execution. Significantly, she is reported to have maintained a tough exterior during their brief meeting, exclaiming that she was sorry to see him there, but if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. Little more is known of Anne, who was pregnant and so escaped execution. Still, her final, scornful words to her lover have resounded through history and would have coloured the contemporary debate about gender relations. Prints of the 2 female pirates in male dress, brandishing weapons, hair flowing against a background of ships and tropical islands indicated to people of the time that women could be as aggressive and independent as men. Early prints of them suggest unease about gender. Although the women are depicted with feminine hairstyles, their breasts are concealed and they seem to have stubble on their faces. Later versions aim to titillate and show the women with their breasts exposed. Popular literature suggests that few people expected seamen to be faithful in port, even when married. The availability of loose women was something that attracted pirates to certain places, like Port Royal. But we know that pirates who formed relationships with local women overseas sometimes married them and settled down, since they could not return home for fear of being hanged. Such unexciting domestic behaviour did not help to sell popular stories about pirate activities, or elicit the moral outrage needed to help support countermeasures against piracy in order to protect trade. So, instead, reports used pirates' abuse of women whenever possible as a demonstration of pirate depravity. Their callous behaviour towards women was foregrounded in publications, helping to build a more sensationalised pirate image. For example, Charles Johnson reported in his General History of the Pirates that Edward Teach, or Blackbeard, had married a girl of about 16 in North Carolina. This, Johnson said, was Blackbeard's 14th wife, about 12 of whom were still alive. He wrote that Blackbeard would spend the night with her on the plantation where she lived, mooring his sloop in a nearby inlet, but that, quote, it was his custom to invite 5 or 6 of his brutal companions to come ashore, and he would force her to prostitute herself to them all, one after another, before his face. Pirates' alleged treatment of women in the Americas reveals their ambivalent relationship with early colonists and the compromises that settlers made in order to establish themselves in their smallholdings. Colonists appreciated the opportunity to trade advantageously with pirates, but they could become trapped in a manipulative, unequal relationship. Johnson reported that Blackbeard and his crew used the wives and daughters of the planters in North Carolina, though he would not absolutely affirm that the pirates treated the women as prostitutes by paying them for their services. It seems that planters colluded with Blackbeard in order to exchange goods, but the pirate inspired fear as much as gratitude, and sexual favors could not be denied him. Johnson claimed that Blackbeard's behavior illustrated, quote, to what a pitch of wickedness human nature may arrive if its passions are not checked. But he also acknowledged, with heavy irony, that all pirates aimed to hold their men in fear, and that those who displayed the greatest wickedness were admired, quote, as a person of more extraordinary gallantry. Blackbeard, it would seem, set out to make his men believe that he might be the devil incarnate, and consequently his total lack of respect for women may have been part of the image he sought to create. He does not appear to have trusted or provided longer term for his wives. Before his final battle, one of his men deviously asked him whether or not his current wife knew where his money was buried, were he to be killed. The pirate retorted angrily that nobody but himself and the devil knew where it was, and the longest liver should take all. Pirates' mistreatment of women was also represented as opportunistic and indiscriminate. When the Scottish pirate John Gow returned to his native waters and anchored in the Orkneys, his boatswain went ashore with 4 armed men to see if they could loot local farms. The author of this account stated that the boatswain carried off 3 women, whom they kept on board and, quote, used so inhumanely that when they set them on shore again, they were not able to go or to stand. One of them died on the beach where they left them. Gow, before his execution, made a point of denying this accusation and said he was incapable of such indecent villainy. But in later accounts of him, the episode was repeated. On the other hand, so strong was the impetus to turn some pirates into popular heroes that their relations with high-ranking women, at least, were liable to be heavily romanticized. In 1695, the pirate Henry Avery, cruising in the Indian Ocean, seized one of the ships of Aurangzeb, the legendary Mughal emperor. The ship contained an enormous amount of treasure, and allegedly his granddaughter also, on a pilgrimage to Mecca. Avery gained a fortune in this one exploit and was said to have married the princess and taken her back to Madagascar. For a time, Avery was represented in England as an entrepreneur who, through his own efforts, had raised his status from a lowly subject to a powerful king on the island, likely to establish a new line of rulers in his exotic realm. A 1709 account of Avery's exploits, the life and adventures of Captain John Avery, the famous English pirate, raised from a cabin boy to a king, now in possession of Madagascar, suggests by its very title that Avery's achievement was a credit to his country. The author insisted that Avery had paid the princess all the respect that was due to her noble birth, and only, quote, plundered her of something more pleasing than the jewels, after they had been properly married by one of her priests. His men drew lots for her attendant women, but each, before enjoying their prize, followed their captain's chaste example and was married by the same priest. In reality, what seems to have happened was that over a number of days the pirates raped the women on board, some of whom committed suicide rather than submit to such a fate. When the pirates had taken all the treasure into their possession, the male captives were released, but the surviving women were kept. In a later account of Avery's exploits, Daniel Defoe claimed that he wished to correct the ridiculous and extravagant accounts that have been put upon the world regarding the pirate's career. Can Clearly, more accurate news of Avery's exploit had reached the media. But Defoe insisted that all reports of Avery ravishing the great mogul's granddaughter, murdering her, and raping all the women in her retinue were utterly untrue. On the contrary, he insisted, the princess and her women had been treated with more decency and humanity than ever women had been treated by pirates before. The narrative takes the form of 2 letters from Avery himself. In one, the pirate denies that he ever raped the princess, but his explanation is unconvincing. He writes, "I have heard that it has been reported in England that I ravished this lady, and then used her most barbarously, but they wrong me, for I never offered anything of that kind to her, I assure you. Nay, I was so far from being inclined to it that I did not like her, and there was one of her ladies who I found much more agreeable to me, and who I was, afterwards, something free with, but not even with her either by force or by way of ravishing." The lower class women in the Mogul ship seem to have fared less well. Avery explains, "The women made no opposition, so the men even took those that were next to them, without ceremony, when and where opportunity offered." But as with so many accounts of the time, it is difficult to say whether this work is intended to be ironical, so that the pirate is damned by his own tongue, or special pleading, intended to minimize the politically inconvenient offense committed against the great mogul, or even the honest words of a popular hero. The differing treatment meted out to the high and low-ranking women suggests that the abuse of the lower class women was not a concern. In the early 18th century, men charged with rape, even against minors, were routinely acquitted, and those convicted of the crime often had their death sentence reduced to transportation or were wholly reprieved. The representation of male attitudes towards women of inferior rank in Defoe's account may be ironical. On the other hand, it may simply be matter of fact and influenced by contemporary lived experience. In London, for example, it was understood that many women in temporary or seasonal employment would need to resort to prostitution from time to time in order to make ends meet, and such women moved with ease from one social environment to another. In a period when the status of women in marriage was a matter of lively debate, notorious pirate liaisons were used as a means to explore male and female assumptions about the married state. This may help to explain why Avery's supposed marriage to an Indian princess attracted such media attention, though his spectacular career was in any case closely followed all over Europe. By the late 1720s, a more critical perspective on Avery's actions was being adopted in popular publications. The history and lives of all the most notorious pirates and their crews, attributed to Daniel Defoe, stated that Avery ravished the young princess and used other beastly actions to the ladies of a retinue. There is no mention of marriage. Defoe claims that Avery forced the princess back to Madagascar, where she bore him a child who died in infancy. Soon afterwards, the princess died of a broken heart. He implies that Avery not only disrupted the trade of the East India Company by antagonizing the Great Mogul, he also damaged Britain's imperial ambition in other ways by setting a negative example of how a conquering power should behave towards indigenous peoples. This was a live issue, and comparisons with Rome, the iconic imperial power, most likely suggested that an easy accommodation with native peoples offered the greatest benefit. So Avery's behavior on Madagascar was a matter for concern. Apparently, he became so powerful that tribal leaders sued for his protection in their own quarrels and he was able to exact from these leaders an annual tribute, said to be their daughters and young virgins who were given to his subjects. Whether or not this was true, the British government definitely wished to disassociate itself from such practices. That said, many pirates seem to have had supportive, resilient wives at home, probably little different to the wives of ordinary seamen, and used to acting on their own initiative when their husbands were at sea. For example, it was customary for the wives and female relations of seamen captured by Barbary pirates to obtain formal warrants known as briefs, licensing them to beg for alms in order to raise the ransom for their sailors' release. The Barbary corsairs operated out of North African ports, where piracy actually was part of the economy. Women whose husbands were imprisoned on charges of piracy were similarly active in trying to obtain their freedom. In 1725, James Guthrie, the ordinary or priest of Newgate, complained that his efforts to save the soul of William Ingram, a London-born mariner convicted of piracy, were undermined by, quote, the constant applications of his wife, and some of his friends made for a reprieve. These offered false hopes and did much to divert the prisoner's mind from his preparations for death. The wives of seamen living in close communities in port towns supported each other through difficult times and worked together. Some 48 wives of pirates signed a petition to Queen Anne in 1707 asking for their husbands overseas to be pardoned. A few were illiterate and just made their mark. This petition suggests several things. Firstly, the women must have been part of a network merely to come together to sign the document. Secondly, these wives of pirates may have had some means of contacting their husbands overseas to be sure that they, in fact, wanted to be pardoned and to return home. Perhaps, too, pirate networks had well-placed contacts in the metropolis, agents who either initiated the petition or saw that it would be in their interest to help coordinate it. The facts reflect the overheated financial atmosphere that existed in Britain's key cities in the early years of the 18th century, when rich men with venture capital to spare were keen to speculate. In the absence of sound information, myths abounded about the fabulous wealth that pirates had amassed on Madagascar. Early in 1707, schemes were proposed to allow pirates stranded there to come home under a general amnesty in return for a share of their booty. The Queen had seemed receptive to an address in the House of Commons the previous year calling for the suppression of piracy, and this offered encouragement. The favoured scheme was the work of a Captain John Breholt, a London shipmaster who turned out to have close associations with pirates. A charismatic speaker, Breholt held promotional meetings at the King's Head in the Strand, a favourite Whig haunt in London, where he spoke passionately about his scheme. Before he was exposed, he gained the interest of several prominent Whigs. On one occasion, he paraded a woman who claimed to be the abandoned wife of Henry Avery. She elicited much sympathy for her plight and added human interest to the prospect of financial gain. It was after this presentation that Breholt got together the Petition of Pirates' Wives. The petition itself concluded with an appeal to the Queen's clemency, but also with a practical economic argument. It pointed out that if the Queen chose to be merciful, pirates, their wives and families would enjoy, quote, the comfort in a better course of life in their own country. All merchants would be free from the disturbance in their trade, and the nation would have the benefit of the money the pirates had stolen. Given the country's empty coffers in wartime, the scheme must have been tempting. But the Board of Trade held an inquiry in 1709 which exposed the flaws in the project. Instead, it recommended that if the Queen wished to suppress or reclaim the pirates on Madagascar, she should use the Navy rather than entrust the enterprise to a private individual of doubtful reputation. 3 women who had signed the petition as pirates' wives, Elizabeth Woodstock, Barbara Ramsay, and Anne Rupert, all testified against Freeholt's character at the inquiry. Elizabeth Woodstock explained that her son had served under Freeholt on a previous voyage when most of his crew had turned pirate and made for Madagascar. They took her son with them, and she supposed him to be there still, which explains her interest in securing a pardon for the men out there. Contemporary descriptions of London suggest that actually it might not have been too difficult for Freeholt to find groups of women with connections to pirates when getting up his petition. The satirist Ned Ward describes a walk through the maritime areas of Deptford and Greenwich in 1717. He noted that women typically ran these maritime communities and inferred that their husbands' prolonged absences made a severe trial of their virtue. He wrote, "Here a pretty woman or two at a door, there another or two at a window, all looking as melancholy as old maids and widows for want of male conversation, gazing upon each man that passed them with as much earnestness and desire as ever our great-grandmother did upon the forbidden fruit. The ladies were the wives of mariners, whose husbands were some gone to the East Indies and some to the West, some northward, some southward, leaving their disconsolate spouses to make trial of their virtue and live upon public credit till their return." The women in the streets were dressed in ragged petticoats, he said, and those that were accompanied by men had generally short, squat, well-trussed fellows by their sides. This was a description that evoked the common sight of women of the town accompanied by their protective bullies. Seamen's wives were left on their own for long periods while their menfolk worked to support them. Occasionally, poor seamen were drawn into a life of crime and piracy just in order to provide for their wives and children. In the early 1690s, when Britain was at war with France, crews regularly complained about poor food and lack of shore leave. But their sharpest complaint was about pay, which was invariably paid much in arrears. A ballad of the time called The Sea Martyrs, or the seamen's sad lamentation for their faithful service, bad pay, and cruel usage, tells the story of seamen who were put to death merely for demanding the pay that was owed them. These sailors evidently became popular heroes, which helps to explain why some communities sympathized with sailors who mutinied and became pirates. The ballad refers to the sailors' families starving at home, describes how wives became sick with worry when they had nothing to feed their children, and reveals that families managed to get by only because tradesmen commonly allowed women to run up debts that would be settled when husbands returned. But even sympathetic tradesmen could not afford to extend credit indefinitely. When pirates were captured, they often used their wives and children as part of their plea for leniency. The trial of William May, a seaman accused of joining Avery's crew, shows how a pirate's passing reference to his wife could bear different interpretations in court. When Avery captured May's ship, bound for the West Indies, and set adrift in the ship's boat all those members of the defeated crew who refused to join him, William May apparently chose to take his chances with Avery. As the pirates forced those members of the crew who remained loyal to their captain into the ship's boat, May took John Gravitt by the hand, wished him a safe journey to England, and bid him remember him to his wife. At his trial, May claimed that he said those words because he thought he was unlikely to see his wife again, having been forced into piracy. Gravitt, on the other hand, claimed that May's tone was very merry and jocund, and that he stayed on board with Avery of his own free will. May was duly found guilty, but the specific mention of this detail, a key point of evidence in the trial, suggests again that people knew by experience and report that pirates formed quite settled relationships with women. And these domestic details form a bizarre counterpoint to their outrageous exploits at sea. The last speeches of pirates about to be executed suggest that in their final moments, pirates were often concerned for the fate of wives and families. William Ingram, executed in 1725, declared that he died in peace with all the world, but that, quote, he was uneasy when he thought upon his wife and small family. Typically, a pirate's career was too short for any dependents to benefit much from their exploits. Thomas Saunders, aged about 40 and executed for stealing, though he had once been a pirate, also showed concern for the family he left behind. He asked, quote, that no reflections might be made upon his innocent family, for if his child were to suffer for his shame, he believed 'twould be impossible that his body could rest under the ground. And he insisted that his wife had taken no part in his crime. But these publications, written by the Ordinary of Newgate, had a clear moral purpose, and it may be that the prison chaplain was merely attributing to the condemned man the kind of feelings and anxieties that seemed to suit the occasion. But Saunders' career does indicate that, however rarely, pirates did come ashore and marry, as did honest seamen once they became too old for the sea. And occasionally, a condemned pirate seems to have been anxious for his wife's good reputation, on which her ability to earn a living, once widowed, might depend. For example, Walter Kennedy, executed in 1721, claimed that he died easy, having only a wife and no children to provide for. The account of his last words was conventionally pious, but he also wished to emphasize his wife's honesty. He said, "I declare that I think my wife a pious and virtuous woman, and she was always against my vices." Contemporaries may have felt that the association of women in piracy helped to degrade women, but the more susceptible were induced to let their imaginations run riot with regard to pirate lifestyles. Contemporary romance literature suggests that pirate captains were certainly the subject of female fantasies. Avery's exploits in the Indian Ocean inspired several female authors, including Penelope Obama, who specialized in sensational short novels. One modish fantasy involves innocent English women captured by pirates and placed in immediate danger of being violently ravished. Obama's romance, The Life of Charlotte Dupont, published in 1723, is typical of this material. The pirate captain in this work became so aroused by the heroine's beauty that, quote, he resolved to gratify his flame by enjoying Carlotta at midnight by force. As he proceeded to freedoms that affronted her modesty, she, taking a sharp bodkin out of her hair, stabbed him in the belly so dangerously that he fell senseless on the bed. At this point, luckily, a Spanish warship caught up with a pirate ship, and Charlotte was freed to pursue other incredible adventures. Penelope Obama was also a shrewd businesswoman who had married into a merchant family on Jersey, and she regularly took charge of domestic finances while her husband served in the army. She was offered a share of the profits of Breholt's Madagascar scheme if she agreed to organize the Petition of Pirates' Wives. Wisely, she declined and gave crucial evidence to the Board of Trade inquiry in 1709 that helped to discredit the project. And in fact, Oban may have known something of piracy, since merchants on Jersey made their fortunes from cod fishing, smuggling, and privateering. Piracy and romance soon became closely linked in the popular pulp fiction of the day. The voyages and adventures of Captain Robert Boyle, for example, included a steamy romance in which the heroine, Mrs. Villiers, tells of being captured by a Barbary pirate who fell so desperately in love with her that he would never permit her to be ransomed. He treated her with decency while she remained captive and allowed her everything but her liberty. This kind of romance literature suggests a close relationship between the reporting of piratical events and the ongoing contemporary debate about marital relations and gender. The romances also foreshadow the kind of seduction narrative that will become of compelling interest later in the century, focusing on sexual relationships, female desires, and the extent to which men could be trusted. These were justifiably important topics. In this period in Britain, quote, it was all too easy to enter a marriage, but virtually impossible to end an unhappy one. These early romances are a form of escapism and wish fulfillment. They carry implicit criticism of the treatment of women in the home. They also prefigure the Gothic novel because they include such motifs as female victimization, captivity, and unfamiliar religious practices. So this is my last slide. I hope I've shown that in a period when the status of women in marriage prompted hot dispute, notorious pirate liaisons were used to explore male and female perspectives on the married state. People of the time knew from report that many pirates had quite ordinary domestic ties. Ironically, this seems to have pushed people to demonize and glamorize pirates. Over time, a sensational pirate image was built around the abuse of women, and this helped to set pirates further apart from society by underlining their depravity. Sorry, this is a shameless plug. If you enjoy reading about the 17th century and sea trade, you may like my latest book, which is a snip and can be bought online. Thank you.
And thank you, Margaret. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm looking forward to listening to it again. It was so full of relevant and interesting information. We all grew up with pirates. We grew up with pirates as being romantic characters. I suppose Jake in Captain Pugwash is the one we can think about as with his black patch. It was this romantic idea was taken well into the 20th century. When did the romance of piracy at that time, after that 50-year period in 1730, whenabouts did it really abate? And is there a reason for that? That's my first question, Margaret. And if I may dare have one more, execution dock. When was it last used to hang a seaman for piracy?
Well, those are two excellent questions. Piracy was always very controversial because there was very little division between being a merchant and being a pirate. Merchants were often called pirates. In fact, I think that was the one epithet that they most objected to. And so even while the sort of lower classes might have mythologized piracy, there will be a whole bundle of merchants and people in authority who will be trying to paint them in very dark colors and to draw a clear line between the two. And that started, you know, when there was a severe crackdown on piracy at the end of the 17th century and certainly into the 1720s. So very early on, there was this kind of contested view of piracy. As for when execution dock was last used, well, the last person to be hung there were two people actually in 1830. And they weren't pirates, they were escaped convicts from Australia who mutinied on board a ship called the Cyprus, then sunk the ship and said that they swam ashore and said that they were survivors from the shipwreck, another shipwreck. But they were found out, brought back to England and hung. The last person to be hung for actually being a pirate at execution dock was in 1760, when Captain John Tune was hung for piracy. But even he was a sort of pale shadow of Blackbeard and the others, because he was nabbed just 3 miles out from Folkestone, and he'd just taken about £150 worth of cloth from a neutral ship. So it was in the golden age, or the so-called golden age of piracy, that these exploits really happened.
I think that's fascinating. Can you answer one final question, if I dare to have three? And that is, people sing about, talk about, read about, tell about, ballad about the Barbary Coast. What is the Barbary Coast?
It's the coast of North Africa, and ports like Tunis and Salé were corsairing ports. Corsairs aren't the same as pirates.
Mhm.
So the corsairs operated from North Africa, where piracy was actually state-sponsored. That's the difference. Pirates are looking out for themselves, but corsairs are part of the state economy.
Very wide between the two.
And as you know, they seized a lot of Christians because they were Muslim, and they ransomed them. And they even raided ports in Cornwall, places like that. And so women they mostly seized men, although there were some women captives, and women were allowed to beg, as I said in my lecture, in order to get the ransom up to get them free.
That's wonderful. I'm so grateful. It's been a wonderful lecture, and more anon. Meanwhile, Jenny hopefully has been able to capture some questions. May I hand over to you, Jenny, and see whether anybody has any questions at the stage? Are you there, Jenny? I think, Jenny, we may have lost you. Are you there? Are we all frozen? Are we okay? Shall I try once more? There is a question here, if I can quickly take it on. This is Malcolm Parrott. Good evening, Malcolm. How long have you got, Margaret? Malcolm asks, what about modern piracy?
Well, I'm sure you've seen the film about Captain Phillips, which is based on a true story. Phenomenal. And I think seafarers today will know a lot more about modern piracy than I do. But it's one thing that's very similar with 17th century piracy is that they're dependent on the shore. Just as 17th century pirates needed to have a base where they could get medicine or food or supplies, it's the same with modern pirates. And so they operate from coastal regions, have shore bases. And as they used to have in the China Sea, modern pirates have these very small, fast boats that attack big ships. And that was the same technique that was used, in Malaysia in the 19th century. So there are lots of different similarities that you can pick out. And I think actually some of the techniques that people adopt today to discourage piracy, scattering things on the deck, like things you can cut yourself with. I think it's in that Captain Phillips film. It's exactly what they did in the Golden Age. They used to put peas and grease on the deck so that when the pirates boarded, they fell over. So,
Jenny, are you there? Because have you picked up Captain Parrott's other comments, which are very interesting, actually?
Yes, Malcolm Parrott also says, Captain Phillips has happened to me off West Africa.
Wow. Well, then you do know a lot more about it than I do.
That is doubly interesting, because actually that's West Africa as opposed to Somalia, where we sort of associate modern piracy with, off the east coast of Africa. Yeah. Wow. That may be the subject of another lecture, Malcolm, so thanks very much indeed.
I think shipping lines don't like to advertise how prevalent piracy is, do they? Because it's very dangerous, obviously, for the ships. And so I don't think we hear so much about it today as actually happens, if that makes sense.
I believe it's a very economic answer. I know that insurance companies will look at that to try and deal, which is basically to look at, I suppose we're looking at poverty, really, that causes this. So basically, you can deal with that. You're dealing with the source of the problem. It's quite an interesting way of approaching it. Jenny, back to you.
Okay. You've talked about Madagascar and Port Royal, Jamaica. Where were the other major haunts of pirates?
It depends which period you're looking at. It started off in the Caribbean. And then when that got too hot, when the colonies in the Caribbean started turning against pirates, with Woodes Rogers and others, the pirates went over to the Red Sea, like Captain Avery, where they could catch these great treasure ships, often on voyages to Mecca. But Madagascar was a very important site for piracy because it kind of linked Eastern piracy with Western piracy. I mean, it really was global, even in the 17th century. And And of course, a number of the early colonists in America just traded quite normally with pirates to avoid the Navigation Acts.
Yes.
So in a funny sort of way, piracy actually helped support growing empire, because it allowed these colonists to cling on, getting their goods more cheaply than they were supposed to, and to trade with Madagascar. So it's all very interesting.
Yeah, black market.
Yeah, black market.
Yeah. In the meantime, Dr. Margaret Lincoln, thank you so much for your erudite talk. It is just lovely to listen to you on these occasions when you share your knowledge, which is so deep and so wide. Thank you very much indeed. And if we were not online, we would, in the usual thing, but I'm doing that for the 83 remaining people online. We were, I think, up to 107 at one stage. So well done indeed, everybody. Jenny, would you like to talk about two things?
Yes. First of all, Margaret and I are deeply involved in preparing an exhibition to be on board Wellington, hopefully from the 27th of June, COVID permitting. And we've chosen the subject of South Asian seafarers, where we've received help from a number of bodies. Dr. Aaron Jaffa, who's listed here, is going to give the first talk that we'll do during the course of the exhibition about Lascars and South Asian seafarers. So 17th of May, Salt, Fish and Shaitan, Lascars' Lives at Sea, 1750 to 1850. And we know, Margaret, don't we, from talking to Aaron and talking and reading his panels and having him edit our panels, that he's an absolutely delightful gentleman and will give us a thoroughly interesting and fascinating talk.
Yeah.
So we'll be sending you all invitations for that lecture as soon as possible. And I'd like to say a thank you to everyone who has donated to us, because this lecture series has proved to be very, very popular. And every penny that's donated goes towards running the Wellington, the ship, the preservation of the ship, and some towards our education program. And we have large ambitions, so we're hoping for large donations. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And I think at that point, I can say that is the end of the formal part of this evening. As I said at the top of the lecture, if you would like to stay on, please just stay there. You don't have to do anything. You will simply be brought back in by Matt, Edgar, hopefully. And let's carry on for a few minutes longer if you'd like to. Meanwhile, thank you so much for all you for coming. Good night for those who are going. There we are. Margaret, you survived the transition. Well done. That was really excellent. Fascinating. I think it was the sort of lecture that prompted questions of the cooking, and they're all going to come up in one's mind. I didn't necessarily think about the privateers and the pirates, but you will explain sometime offline what that's all about.
Yeah, and letters of marque and letters of reprisal, they're all very complicated legal matters.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One wonders that if one looks at things like the City of London, who obviously were all about trade, and indeed, I think, well, you're the historian, I think there was a kind of support for the Americans at the time of the wars of independence, I think, because of the trade lines that the city had with America, I think, and that was in contention against the sovereign. So I wondered what extent really the Americans, the members of the trades, the merchants in the city, actually would sort of turn the proverbial blind eye as often as they could to the whole idea of piracy.
Well, it depended. I mean, most trade was armed trade, wasn't it? I mean, once you sent your ship where you couldn't communicate with it, the sailors were expected to fight to preserve the cargo.
Yeah.
They weren't expected to see a pirate ship raise a pirate flag and say, "Oh, okay then," don't hurt us. So the merchants gave them lots of encouragement to fight.
Yeah.
But equally, lots of merchants were engaged in piratical dealings.
One can imagine.
So, I mean, a lot of imperial trade was nothing but land grabs and piracy.
Yeah.
So there are very mixed messages about it. And of course, when they went to India, they called all the indigenous seafarers who were just getting the normal toll on called them pirates.
Yeah.
So that the Navy could actually protect English trade and kill indigenous seamen. So it's a very mixed picture. It's very hard to disentangle it all. It's all bound up with empire.
Yeah, sure. Malcolm, your story is very interesting. Malcolm Parrott, Captain Parrott. How commonplace has it been, modern piracy on container ships?
It's very common today. It's been common for the last, I would say, 30 years. I haven't been to sea for a long time, but I'm talking about the 1980s.
Yeah.
In particular, that attack that I had off the west coast of Africa, I had a total Chinese crew. And as Margaret says, they use fast boats with high powered engines on the back. They were long boats. They'd come alongside, they'd throw grappling irons, believe it or not, to grip onto the sheer strake, and then they would clamber up the rope onto the deck and attack us with knives, and sometimes things like very rusty guns and things like that. Being an ex RFA officer and Royal Naval Reserve officer, I organized my crew to fight back. I'm talking about 1984, I suppose. And 82, 83, I can't remember exactly. We were off Monrovia. They came on board mid-morning. I'd organized my Chinese crew. I was the only white man on board. And we had hoses to sink their boats as they came on board. And we were armed with pickaxe handles and crowbars. And I had my own knife. We actually captured 2, but that's another story.
Yeah. You had no choice, really, did you?
Absolutely not, but I'm not saying anything more because I might incriminate myself.
Did you ever share your experience with a certain Captain Phillips as a matter of interest?
No, never.
Never.
He unfortunately got captured. I never did.
It was an extraordinary story, wasn't it? And I think Tom Hanks did it extremely well as well. That part.
The only part of the story that I didn't recognize was him coming on board and immediately sailing. That wouldn't have happened. A captain does not relieve another captain by just coming on board and taking over. There's a period of handover between the 2 captains.
Yeah.
Just the same as there would be on a naval vessel.
That was licensed within a 2-hour film, so I guess probably. Yeah, exactly. I mean, a naval vessel will be 4 hours or 8 hours to steaming normally in those circumstances, wouldn't it? Yeah.
But I've also been attacked by pirates in the Caribbean, in Costa Rica, while I was alongside in Puerto Limon.
Wow.
Interesting. We once had a fast rib come out when we were on our way we were sailing. This was with Paul Kenley, actually, Malcolm, who you know. We used to sail together regularly. And we were approached by a fast rib that came along and said, "Excuse me," he said, when he came alongside, "we're lost. Could you tell us where we are?" And he said, where Guernsey is. He was that stupid. There were just 2 of them in this thing. And I remember it was called Manhattan Transfer, the boat as well. It was right across the rail at the back, the stern. And We said, yes. I said, look, that's the sun up there to the south. He said, just keep it on your right-hand side and just go whichever way it takes you. I got straight on to Coast Guard on 16 down to 21 and told them that we had an interesting chap just been to say hello to us. We actually had spanners in hand at that stage when he came alongside us.
That is actually a genuine, bona fide method of navigation. If you're lost, ask somebody else.
Yeah, well, probably they looked like the sort of guys who probably didn't know very much about what they were doing. And there wasn't a sail in sight, so you wouldn't blame them. There we are. Has anybody else had some extraordinary experiences? Stephen, you must have been actually had a go sometime. And Diana, hello. Nice to see you both. You're on mute, Diana. Yeah. Oh, you're still on mute. Right, still on mute. Still on mute. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
you're off. Hello, welcome back.
Hello. This is a bit of a non-story about being off Madagascar in a noble coal boat. And we were all sunbathing, well, some of us were sunbathing at the front end. And along came one of the two SBS retired guards that we had on board. He was very tall and very muscular, wearing a tiny little swimsuit and absolutely covered in tattoos. And he started exercising on the sort of metal thing going across. And we reckoned that if we were attacked by pirates, they would he only had to lean over the side with his AK whoppity wop, dressed the way he was, and they'd all fall back into the sea in fright. And that would be the end of it. So we felt very safe with that chap. End of story. Sorry about that.
Story. Sea hoses are very useful things, aren't they? I remember when we were fueling in Jagger frigate at Gann, halfway across the Indian Ocean, and all the bumboats came along and they tried to climb up the mooring line. So Jack was there, Jack was there in both watches of Jack were there, unroving the sea hose and threatening these guys, and they didn't make it anywhere near coming over the side.
No, and Alistair, you asked me. My only experience of piracy was getting a letter from the European court when I was commanding a fishery protection minesweeper, accusing me of piracy on the high seas.
What?
For illegally boarding a French trawler in our national waters and taking him under arrest. And he put in a complaint to his company. And it just so happened, strange things, that our Minister for Shipping, who got involved in this because it blew up in Whitehall, was actually one of the biggest shareholders in this French company.
Nothing changes even today, does it?
It wasn't too many years ago. About the same as Malcolm, 1980. Something.
That reminds me, we must get our fishery protection stories together sometime, Stephen, you and me, and just do a little pamphlet. We've got a few. Very good. John Freeston, lovely to see you this evening. How are you keeping? You're on mute. You're good to see you, John.
Yeah, nice to see you, Alistair. My dit was I was attacked by pirates when I was 16 in the Malacca Straits, and it scared me to death. They came aboard. I was on a Liberty ship, which the speed was an Empire ship. The speed was 9.5 knots, so it's no problem them coming alongside, and they got on board so quickly because we were loaded. The freeboard was not much. They got on board so quickly, but it wasn't the days where they kidnapped ships. All they did then was go to each cabin, turn it over completely, and steal what they wanted on board. But
that's interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting that they're scared. The Malacca Straits obviously were notorious, and I don't know if Richard Shuttleworth is on, but. He was running in a minesweeper out in the Malacca Straits on patrol as well. I made sort of passing reference to insurance business, and a client of mine who's an underwriter I had lunch with a few years back when he was just retiring. And he talked about this business of how insurance companies now look at funding the source, which really is, rather than actually waiting for the thing to happen, hopefully to help with Somalians, basically, or with that economy by doing things. I don't know quite, he didn't explain any more than that. But he said that's an arrangement we would never use in the Malacca Straits, because in Malacca, they are violent. In Somalia, not quite in the same way. It's interesting. Richard, you're there. Did you actually have any exciting experiences in your time with piracy out in Singapore? You're on mute at the moment. There you are.
There we are. No, I never had any problems. We were at the end of confrontation, really, and we were more interested in searching Indonesian sand pits, some pits. And then after that, it was just going on visits around the Far East. We didn't do much of that sort of patrolling.
Yeah. Now, John Blake, did pirates use sea charts, or did they know their waters, or didn't they care? You're on mute at the moment, John. John is, those who don't know him, is a real specialist on the history of sea charts. Fascinating too. John, can you click off? There's an icon that's got a line through it. It's a video camera with a diagonal red line on it.
There you go.
No, sorry, the mute. It's a microphone. You're on. That's good. Well done.
You got it. Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Indeed, there are pirates charts, and Daniel Defoe refers to the famous pirate who actually charted the west coast of Australia on his. He was both indeed for government business, and then set out on his own as a pirate as well. I think that could make a subject all of its own.
It certainly could. I don't know if I'm actually
a speaker on that.
Well, I don't know if I'm sort of blowing it, but I know we've been talking about the idea of bringing you in to do one of these lectures on your subject. I think actually we ought to give you probably 3 lectures, because it's so detailed, and your publications are so great. They really are.
Well,
anybody who
has
a book on the sea chart, it's a wonderful read. It really is.
Well, that's very kind, Alison.
And that may be something you can bring into your talk when Jenny, hopefully we'll be asking him to do it.
I will now.
Yeah. Good. I had got around to it. It was on my list of things to do. Sorry, John, I was supposed to tell you. Greg Spencer, good evening.
Good evening to you. Just going through Captain Phillips, a little bit of detail there. I happened to meet the SEAL commander who was in charge of the operation, and the detail of that is quite interesting. Having deceived the pirates, the lifeboat, and they took the lifeboat in tow, and then the SEALs were on board. They then brought it into a specific range, and the SEALs then, 4 of them, on the flight deck, took up their sights, and they were there most of the night. They gauged the yaw and the pitch and roll and yaw. They knew the range, and they had to do 2 shots. The first shot to take out the glass, and the second shot was the head shot. And in actual fact, the first shot actually took out the glass and was a head shot as well. But the detail of how they, as I say, they gauged the pitch and roll and the yaw together with the legs. They only had 1 go at this. Yeah.
The film covered that quite well, I seem to remember, Greg.
It did.
And it was building it was a part of the tension of the thing, because obviously these guys were getting very impatient, and we didn't know what was going to happen next. Or those who didn't know the story of Captain Phillips. And at the same time, here was this guy sort of lined up with his night sight, trying to get it absolutely right. So
and they had and of course they had their seaboat sort of came round the back.
Yeah.
Which had been silently deployed and stealth to be there the moment it all happened.
Yeah, sure. Wow. Look what you started, Margaret. It's been great. Well, it's so lovely to have so many of us still on. The 31. I think I did mention beforehand, Margaret, usually between 20, 30 people. Anthony Andy Owler. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. I'm a guest. I'm ex-Merchant Navy too. I wanted to go back to our speaker's subject, if I may. Was the Gilbert and Sullivan Pirates of Penzance was over a century after the period you were talking about? But were pirates rehabilitated into British psyche, and was it therefore okay to write a comic opera about pirates, so-called brigands and undesirables?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. By the time of Gilbert and Sullivan, of course, pirates were the source of children's stories, Treasure Island, and they also had little pictures, kits that you could buy for children, where you made pictures of pirates with tinsel and silver foil, and so you may have seen them in toy shops, old-fashioned toy shops. So pirates were by then associated with entertainment, not with a danger to trade, because of course the Royal Navy was much more efficient and able to protect trade in a way that lone naval ships in the 1700s were not. I mean, Defoe makes this point, that pirates could tackle whole fleets of ships, but when the tables were turned, the Royal Navy had trouble finding any pirates. I mean, pirates knew the sloops. They knew the little inlets all the way down the east coast of America, so they could easily hide, and it was very hard for the Navy to find them.
Thank you very much.
That's a really good question. Yeah.
Taking your lead from pirates about entertainment. First of all, I did sing the Pirate King once upon a time at the Jubilee Hall in Aldeburgh, which was great fun. But the thing I love is an Australian production of Pirates of Penzance, where the Pirate King stupidly sort of gets onto a rope and he swings out across the orchestra pit. And the conductor at that point stops it. He stops the orchestra and he says, "You can't do that." He says, "What do you mean?" And there's the Pirate King standing at the front of the stage, and they're having an argument. He says, "Yes, that's very dangerous. You can't go across the light." Sorry, that's South African, but whatever, the Australian equivalent. "You can't do that." And they actually got into a fight, him with his cutlass as the pirate, and the conductor with his baton. It was absolutely killing. Entertainment amongst pirates. Yeah, there it is. Wow, that stopped the conversation.
I've got that mental picture now.
Exactly. We still have 31 people on, which is wonderful.
Are there any plans for the lectures to go back on board?
Jenny, your call.
Yes. At this moment in time, no. The reason being the numbers had dropped dramatically. Not many people were signing up for supper. And what we're going to try and do is to find other ways of bringing more people on board for get-togethers, if you like, rather than lectures.
Can it not be done with on Zoom and on board? Is that not?
It's quite complex technically to do that. I'm not saying never. But we've had so much else to get on with, Barbara, that we decided for the moment not to take the lectures back on board. But I will never say never.
We also do have quite an international attendance sometimes, don't we? We have Australia and New Zealand who've been on our lectures.
I thought it could be combined. I didn't realise it was. I don't understand the technical.
Yeah, we've talked about that, Barbara, but I think technically it's a matter of sound quality, camera positioning, what you're seeing. I mean, tonight was a lovely example because it was pre-recorded, which I think was great because it was a long topic, but covered very quickly. If you can imagine the problem with changing slides and someone on the other end, 9,000 miles away or 11,000 miles away in Australia, trying to sort of see what's happening. Yeah. It could be a bit chaotic. We feel slightly more relaxed about these lectures now that we're onto the webinar system, which is not what we had at the start. Sorry, Jenny.
It gets to be quite costly, Barbara, to film it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Perhaps you could just have 1 or 2 a year.
Maybe we could. Well, as I said, we're looking at having more social get-togethers as time progresses, and we've got a bit more time to work on it. Yeah.
It's a very international community.
Anthony Arlo, it was so good to have you on board. And is this your first lecture with us?
It is indeed. I have a friend who is a member of the livery company for shipwrights.
All right.
He and I belong to the same protest organisation in Cobham, and I've been inviting him to Institute of Marine Engineers talks, and he was returning the compliment to us.
Well, that's excellent. I don't know whether you saw through the shipwrights the lecture we did that particular month. That was that 4 months ago, Jenny? Paul Stott?
November, yeah. November.
Yeah, it was November. Gosh, as long as that. Time flies when you're having fun. There was an excellent talk on what happened to the British shipbuilding industry, basically, and there's a recording of that available. So, Anthony, if you ever wanted that, perhaps Fiona, you could send it to him, the link. Yeah,
I'd be most interested as an engineer cadet in the 60s. I spent time working in shipyards, and subsequently, after I left the sea, as a site engineer working on Swan Hunter warships and the Clyde and so on.
Fantastic.
I'm partially deaf now because I was a shipyard worker.
Oh, really?
Yes. Thank you very much. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. There we are. Well, I think we're sort of drawing to a sort of natural close, really, not to rush anybody off, because I can go on forever. I mean, it's the most lovely evening, and I always love these wash-ups at the end and whatever. That's
an interesting thing to come up. Was that something about the two lads? About the lad.
There you are. Tell another story, Stephen. Diana's prompting you. Bye.
Sorry, am I still on?
Yeah, of course you are. You always are. Whenever there's
we all love you. Thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye. Thanks.
That was a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Very much.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Again.
Thanks so much.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
I'll wait until everyone's gone and close the door and go and have a pint.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Roger, nice of you to stay on.
Thank
See
you,
you,
Papa.
speak to you soon.
Okay. No.
And Terry, good to see you.
Can I make a suggestion?
Let's do.
Andy Elder again. We've attended a couple of wine and cheese tasting evenings, courtesy of Zoom, set up by my livery company, the Scientific Instrument Makers. It's a commercial company in Yorkshire who will send you a box of wine and cheese, enough for 2 people. It takes about an hour and a quarter of an evening. The company provides speaker's the wrong phrase, a person who knows their wine and their cheese, and you sample the wine. It arrives the day before the talk. It was a marvelous evening. Some people got dressed up in dinner jackets, but they don't often get to do that these days. And it was made a very social evening, and it made a profit for the livery company.
I think that's a lovely idea. Would you like to send a link of that to Fiona, who is going to send you the link of the
I'd
lecture?
be very happy to do that, yes.
And we'll have a look at that. By the way, you're a scientific instrument maker. You know that, did you know Guy Brocklebank, our late and much lamented
Indeed,
chairman?
yes. I heard about his accident.
Yeah, sure. You know about the memorial service, which is in September?
No, I didn't know.
I'll send you the link. Again, Fiona, can you remind me tomorrow? It's in Southwark Cathedral. I think it's on the 17th September. I'll just check the dates.
Okay.
It was going to be in May, but we've delayed it because of COVID.
He used to work, he's an ex-master of the Scientific Instrument Makers, and I always threatened to turn up in my engineer's 3-ring uniform, but he went up to be a captain or senior captain.
He would pull rank on you.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
He will pull rank, indeed.
Thank you for the invitation to come this evening.
Well, that's great of you to come on, and thanks for offering to send that other information. That'd be great.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.
Richard, how are you? Are you keeping well?
Yeah, getting bored. I have managed one pub, and I'm looking forward to some more.
Did you see that bit about the string bags on the shore of Sicily?
No, I did. Oh, crashing there.
Yeah, crashing. There was a piece that what's his name? Our good old friend, CNC member, who puts up the Pusser Speak. You know, the newsletter. Are you on that at all?
No.
I'll send you the link. You'll see it. In fact, yesterday's has a lot of stuff pulled out. It has obituaries, it has stories, it has whatever. Really put out in the press. This is oh gosh, I'm forgetting.
Lester May.
Lester May. Thank you
I
very
don't
much.
mind not on that.
Lester puts this together, and you should be on it, actually, Richard. It's a very good story about the string bags, including the one that was supposed to have attacked the Bismarck. Actually finished its days in an aborted raid on the Italian fleet down. It wasn't Taranto, but it was another occasion, and they had to ditch off, and in one case on the beach of Sicily, and the guys died, obviously. Oh, there
Yeah,
you go. John, good to see you, dear boy.
Alistair, can you include me on the
Pusser thing?
Yeah, Uncle's Banks.
Will do. Stephen, you get that, don't you?
Yeah. Yes.
Makers, in fact.
No, it's very good. I'll make sure you're on that.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Good. I'm just looking to see if there's anybody else who should be on that. Yep, I think we're there, probably. Very good.
Alistair, did you get
John.
the date? Yeah, it was the 21st
of September.
14:30. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. So it's not the 17th, it's the 21st. Okay.
Yeah, 14:30 at
Roger,
Southwark.
Dodge. Okay.
21st.
It's
I've
the
got it on
21st.
17th.
Say again?
Is that Guy's Memorial?
Guy's Memorial.
I've got it down as the 17th of September.
Well, that was the date I just put it. Is that because I just gave you the date, the 17th of September?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that for a while.
Friday the 17th
Yeah,
at 2:30.
that's right.
That's not what you've got, is it, John?
No, it's not.
I'll check the link. I'll get the link because it came around again. And I'll send it on to you, John.
It was going to be in May.
It
Yeah,
was.
it was going to be May the
And
21st.
they pushed it on to. I've got Friday the 17th in my diary.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I stand corrected then if it's been changed, but that's what it was originally at Southwark Cathedral.
Okay, I'll send you the link for that. Can you remind me, Fiona? You know what my memory is for the moment. Okay, John, did you know Guy through CNC or anything else?
Me?
No, sorry. Johnny Blake.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, he very kindly. I knew him quite well actually. He was a great guy, and forgive the pun, but in fact, I remember I did give a talk to the scientific instrument makers years ago at Guy's request.
Oh, really?
That was on board.
Yeah,
no, it was at the hall. That's right. Yeah.
You're way down in Welsh Wales, but I'll send you the link for that as well. Fiona, if you can remind me, John Blake. Okay, and you can at least know about the date and know when it's happening. That's the most important. I suspect probably it'll be still, even at that stage, available on a live transmission. I hope so. Anyway, Angela Jacob, how nice of you to come in. Is that you there?
She is my sister.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, good heavens!
And we have my brother. David from South Africa as well.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
you know, I hadn't done the Pelmanism bit with putting the Blakes together and turning the cards up.
Yeah.
Are you from or are you in South Africa, David?
I'm in South Africa, not far from Simonstone, actually.
Good heavens. How wonderful. Just in the Cape. How lovely. How lovely.
And for my sins, I'm a member of we've got a ship society there. We meet down at the Cape Town docks, actually.
Yeah.
That's, of course, with the present pandemic, there are problems with meeting. But we put together interesting things, and it would be lovely perhaps to include HQS Wellington at some stage and what you're up to. But we'll think about that.
Great pleasure.
Could I ask, David?
David W. Blake, South Africa. Okay, thank you.
David, do you still have a ton class minesweeper that was converted into a commercial boat lying down in the bottom end of South Africa? I think there's still a ton class hull that is floating around down in South Africa.
I've never heard of that at all.
I can't answer that at all. We've got very little. The Navy budget is pathetic, to coin a phrase.
Yeah.
And there's nothing much actually that can really get put to sea. And I don't know about a minesweeper. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
Interesting. Stephen, you must do some more research on that. I'd be most interested in there's an old ton out there. Yeah. Not many of them left. I was threatening to do a thing maybe with Glyn next year, and certainly with Richard if he's still on.
It's interesting because in the latest newsletter that Leicester's put out, the demise of the minesweepers and mine hunters, and I've just found when I joined the Ton Association in 1993, I think, and the letters to the organization of some of the earlier editions were nearly all from people who'd been full admirals.
Really?
Well, one wonders where in the future the admirals will get any sea experience if we've lost our little minesweepers.
You know what? In the 4th MCM, Stephen, the Fishery Protection Squadron, and you and I were both
indeed
willing members of that squadron. Ron Pallister, my skipper, he is navigator. And if a junior officer anywhere in the world wants ship handling experience, go join the Fishery Protection Squadron, because you're throwing your vessel all over the place. The first MCM, the Bag Mealy Squadron, because they went out at 8 in the morning and came back in time for tea with their packed lunches, the Bag Mealy Squadron, they're called. I mean, they I'm sure, sort of did good things like minesweeping. We just used to throw ourselves around the sea looking at fish boats, didn't we?
Absolutely.
It was terrific.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Steve was known in the Scottish Daily News as a pirate of Port Edgar. Because he got so many arrests.
It was Martin Weems, Whiskey Weems.
Whiskey Weems.
Oh yeah.
He was supporting me at a court martial when I happened to have had a little problem on the banks of the Outer Hebrides.
Yeah.
And he gave a statement to the press and said that when Taylor took over the ship a month ago, he inherited a somewhat piratical outfit. And there's a big headline in the Daily Express, I've still got it, saying Pirates of Port Edgar.
I think that's wonderful. Sadly, that never sort of drifted over to any other ships. Brereton was certainly never dubbed that, which is a shame. I think that's amazing. But they were great days.
They were.
Did you used to have the railway? Did you have the railway timetable on the bridge, Stephen?
Oh yeah. And
I think
we lived on a lovely house between the two bridges, and I could train the 10-inch SP on the port side to our to the house as we came through the railway bridge.
You were flashing.
She just
flashing Diana
on the baby, put her in the car and drive down to Lochinvar just in time for the first heaving line to come across.
That's the most sophisticated way of actually meeting someone off the ship I've ever heard of. Alpha, get in the car.
I can stay forever, but I've got to go now.
Great to see you, Richard. Bless you.
Thanks very much. It was really lovely.
It was great.
I never asked Dr. Margaret whether they still wear the Jolly Roger at all.
Oh God, that's a question to ask.
Was it ever used at all?
Was that a myth? Was that a myth, do you think?
You know, it wasn't a very academic question, so I didn't ask it.
We should have done. Great. And thank you everyone else for coming on. It's terrific. And thank you, David, all the way from South Africa. We're truly international. Another reason for actually keeping online for these events. Yeah.